Hi guys! So we're actually gonna skip the intro today because as you can see, we have a very long video today. I also want to apologize because I know in my last video I said, oh, maybe next video I'll do a more lighthearted, fun video, not so serious. Here we are, as you can see by the title. I have kind of been hyper fixated on these two things I'll be talking about today, and this overall question that I feel like is becoming more and more common for people to ask. So this video is going to cover some pretty serious topics. Trigger warning for those topics, we are going to be heavily talking about child SA, as well as some minor mentions of animal abuse, as well as murder. So if you feel like that is not something you want to listen to, I would not recommend watching this video. In this video, I really wanted to talk about how society has responded over the years to those who kill their abusers, and why it seems that pedophilia particularly isn't and hasn't been taken as seriously as it should be. So this actually all started when I was waiting for the outcome of the parole hearings for Eric and Lyle Menendez, and I commented on this post, and oh my goodness, the responses I got were seriously crazy. I mean, I'm showing some on the screen now. Maybe I just shouldn't have been here at all. I mean, what is going on? I was just kind of shocked by the response over saying such a simple comment. It really opened my eyes to just how little some people seem to understand abuse, honestly, and how that abuse can affect a person. And on top of that, it honestly just showed me that these people either watched a totally different trial or just didn't watch it, quite honestly. It's easily available to watch the Menendez brothers' entire trial on YouTube. It was televised. It's not like I have top secret information. It's very easy information to find. This comment alone just lets me know that this person most likely hasn't watched the trial because they didn't even know it was available online. Apparently, you guys, you have to have been in the courtroom to truly understand the trial. When it was televised, okay, I'll get more into the Menendez brothers in a little bit because I actually saw something else this past week that had some similarities to the Menendez brothers situation. They're definitely not the exact same by any means, but there is one aspect that is pretty similar, and that is murdering your abuser. So every now and then I tune into Stephanie Sue's YouTube channel. She talks about a lot of true crime cases on her channel. And recently she interviewed a man named Clark Fredericks, who was essayed as a child by a man named Dennis Pegg. Dennis Pegg was a well-known Boy Scout leader as well as a law enforcement officer. Clark actually released a book called Scarred, and he shared a little bit about what's in this book on Stephanie Sue's two-part series on her YouTube channel. From the way groomers will introduce innocent touch to their victims as a gateway to them later on, and the way that Dennis Pegg would literally harm his dog, beat his dog, in order to ensure that Clark would not tell anyone about the sexual experiences that they had. What he shared in these two interviews is just beyond heartbreaking and hard to listen to, but I highly recommend that you guys check out the entirety of it because I'm not going to go super in depth into the things that he talked about there, but I felt like Stephanie's interview was very respectful and very well done, and I do love what Clark shared as well. I'll kind of summarize the interviews for you guys so you guys can understand Clark's experience a little better, but essentially Clark ended up running into Dennis Pegg twice, but the second time he ran into him was at a coffee shop, and this was many years after he had been essayed as a child by Dennis. Strangely enough, Dennis says to him, "Hi buddy," at the coffee shop, which obviously is a very disturbing thing to say to someone that you abused as a child. Clark said that he felt like he almost just froze when this happened and was basically transported back to that time when he was essayed as a child by seeing Dennis and Dennis speaking to him. But he said that the most disturbing thing he noticed was that Dennis was actually accompanied by a young boy, and that the boy that was with him called Dennis a nickname that Clark remembered. It was a nickname that Clark had called Dennis when he was being abused by him. Clark said that that interaction obviously deeply bothered him and he could not stop thinking about it. He was worried that Dennis was doing to that young boy what happened to him as a child. These thoughts affected him so badly that he actually ended up turning to drug use as well as alcohol and he even left his job as a result. This is an important thing to remember, that 30 years after the abuse that Clark suffered, he actually came out and told someone about it. And this is something that is very common with victims of abuse. They don't always just come right out and say that they were abused. They're sometimes scared to talk about their abuser. They're embarrassed. They feel shame. That's a very common thing to see with victims of abuse. But he revealed to his friend Bob that Dennis had molested him as a child. He says to Bob, "I have got to go confront Dennis." And that leads to Clark and Bob actually going to Dennis's house. Clark could just not get over seeing that young boy with Dennis all those years later and wondering, is Dennis still abusing children? And so he barged right into Dennis's home, and Dennis casually says, "Hey, how are you?" And Clark, I can't blame him for this, immediately snaps, telling Dennis, "I'll show you how the hell I am." He then began stabbing Dennis with a knife that he brought. He then says to Dennis, "It's not so fun raping little boys now, is it, Dennis?" Then he slits Dennis's throat. Before Clark leaves the scene, he spits on Dennis's bed, which is actually where Clark was molested as a child. Clark was ultimately arrested for Dennis's murder in 2012 and given the minimum of 5 years. This is just a brief synopsis of what he shared on Stephanie's YouTube channel. I really love how Stephanie also included when he spoke on the stand, and it was very emotional to listen to. It's probably one of my favorite parts of her video because I obviously feel for Clark. I feel very strongly about people that abuse anyone, of course, but especially children who are extremely vulnerable, and they know that children are vulnerable and they prey on that and they use that to their advantage, and it's just absolutely sick. I mean, Dennis started approaching Clark in a predatory way to see a scar that was on Clark's body from heart surgery, and it's just so sick to think about. But Clark definitely turned this terrible situation and now is an advocate. He speaks for child SA survivors. He's very involved. I actually followed him on Instagram just to see what he's up to. He has his own podcast. I think he's doing great work, and especially for male victims. Obviously, there are plenty of victims of women when it comes to SA, but male victims exist as well, of course. And so I think it's great that he's using his platform to hopefully give people the courage to deal with their trauma and cope with what they went through as children. So that's a brief summary of Clark's experience. Now back to the Menendez brothers. The whole time I was listening to Clark, I definitely thought of the Menendez brothers, but funny enough, I go to Clark's Instagram and what do you know, he actually talks about the Menendez brothers on his Instagram, and I'll include that video here on what he had to say about that.
I have gotten so many inquiries about the Menendez brothers. They allege that their father, who was a high-ranking executive in the entertainment industry, had been molesting them, and that their mother knew and did nothing about it. They were portrayed as just being greedy and wanting their parents' estate and money. Yes, this dirty little secret of sex was just kept under the rugs, and it was a lot easier to just say it was two brothers who wanted their parents' money than to face the fact that their father, who was a very public figure in the entertainment industry, could have been abusing them. Monsters hide in plain sight. They're well known, well respected, and it's just in the last few years that veil has been coming down where people look at public people and high profile people differently now and can realize that monsters come in all forms. If you listen to any of my podcasts, you will hear how mothers are complacent about the abuse going on. I hear that over and over and over about these mothers that do nothing about the abuse. They're equally as evil as the abuser. Could I understand how the Menendez brothers would want to shoot their mother? Oh, hell yeah. Could I understand how they would want to their father? Look at my situation. Look at every abuse victim that reaches out to me and says, you did exactly what I wanted to do and have dreamt of doing. So the Menendez brothers did it. And the only problem, I had the prosecutor on my case. He said rehabilitation for pedophiles really does not work. It does not drastically improve their odds of not reoffending. I can't sit here and tell people to go do what I did. That would be reckless. And one of the main reasons is you're going to flush your life away. I was blessed to get a 5-year sentence. The Menendez brothers got a life sentence. A guy out in Pennsylvania went to the cops multiple times about this guy who, him and his sister, nothing was done. He just saw the guy on his riding lawnmower mowing his lawn. He stopped with a shotgun out, killed the guy. Now he'll face first-degree murder. I had a girl reach out to me on Instagram whose brother killed her father because he had been molesting him. The brother's doing a life sentence. You don't want to go kill your abusers and flush the rest of your life away. You want to heal. You don't heal from trauma by adding more trauma. So can I fully understand what the Menendez brothers did, including the mother? Yes, 1,000%. Did they get railroaded 30 years ago by the prosecutors painting it as greed? Yes. Did the prosecutor in my case do anything like that? No. He did a dual investigation and uncovered enough dirt on Dennis Pegg, my abuser, that he had a good picture of why I did what I did.
I feel like most people are aware of the Menendez brothers and their trials and their case overall, but if you are unaware, I'm just going to give a brief summary. The Menendez brothers, Eric and Lyle, were convicted of killing their parents. Their parents' names are Jose and Kitty Menendez. While many believe that the brothers were spoiled brats that parents for monetary gain, people like myself believe 100% that they were violently abused and molested at the hands of their father and even their mother as well. People like myself believe that the killings were done in self-defense after years and years of abuse, and they should have gotten manslaughter. Before the killings of their parents, Eric said on the stand that his mother Kitty told him that she was aware of the things that were going on between him and his father. She said to him, "What do you think? I'm stupid?" When Eric told her, "You wouldn't understand," when she asked what was wrong with him. This solidified to Eric and Lyle that Kitty was completely aware of what Jose was doing to them behind closed doors. Lyle had also threatened Jose and said that he would tell everyone what he was doing to Eric, because according to Lyle and Eric, Jose was continuing to Eric, and Eric would not fight back because he was scared of his father. They said that after this threat, they really started to see some different behavior from their parents. They wanted to go on a boat. The situations they would find themselves in made them unsettled, and so they ultimately felt like they needed to have guns. So they bought guns in case things inside the home escalated. When things did ultimately escalate, the brothers parents to death. The brothers originally claimed that their parents' deaths were mafia related. They went on to spend large amounts of money after their parents' deaths. Of course, this raised eyebrows to the public, me included, when I was first learning about this case. But eventually Lyle and Eric claimed that their parents had abused them for years and that these killings were done in self-defense. Eric and Lyle said that they did not want to come forward about the abuse, which again, I mentioned earlier, it's very common for those who are abused. In Clark's situation, for example, I mean, he didn't come out till 30 years later about Dennis. They claimed that they didn't want to confess to the deaths because they knew if they did confess to killing their parents, they would have to reveal the motive as to why, which they said was because of the abuse. And they didn't want to tarnish their mother and father's reputation by telling basically the world, since the trial was televised, that they were molested. There were many parts of this trial that stuck with me. Two parts, of course, being Eric and Lyle's testimonies alone. Eric got very emotional on the stand when he spoke about his father's abuse detail, and it was very hard to watch, and I in no way believe that what they said on the stand was scripted or acting. There's also a part where Lyle gets very emotional when revealing that he did the same thing to Eric that Jose had done to him. Both of them can be seen crying, Lyle on the stand and Eric, and Lyle even says, "I'm sorry" to Eric. And Eric's reaction, I just don't see personally how people think that it's faked or coached. Aside from the brothers' testimony, which a lot of people again try to discredit due to their lies previously, you know, saying that the mafia did it and then spending their parents' money, a lot of people just from that alone didn't really want to believe anything they said and could not see it any other way. But there's also witness testimony that I feel like really speaks volumes to the case, mainly from their cousin Andy and Diane. Cousin Andy testified that Eric had asked if it was normal for his father Jose to be touching him. There was even a letter to Andy that was recovered years after the trial and dated months before the crimes, where Eric recounted abuse he was suffering once again. Their cousin Diane actually stayed at the home with them and testified that when he was a child, Lyle asked if he could stay in her room for the night because his dad would come into his room and touch him inappropriately at night. When Diane confronted Kitty about what Lyle had told her, Kitty did not believe it and she dismissed it. Diane was also told that when Jose was with one of his sons and the door was shut, she was not allowed to go near the door, which is obviously pretty odd. Their cousin Alan actually spoke to CBS News years later because he also stayed at the Menendez household because he had actually spent summers in the Menendez household. He said that he did witness physical such as Jose hitting brothers with belts. And he also noticed that Kitty seemed very emotionally distant from her children. She wouldn't console them when they were upset, things like that. He also claimed that even when the brothers got older, Jose would still continue to shower with them. And he even claimed the same thing that Diane testified to, that when the door was shut to the master bedroom, he was not allowed to go near the door when Jose and one of the brothers were in the room together. Even Roy Rosello, who is a member of the band Menudo, which Jose Menendez actually managed, there's actually a documentary about his experience with Jose Menendez, and he claims that he was also which I think is very telling because some people like to say that the Menendez brothers family, they're just saying things and saying that they believe them and want them out because they're family, and that it's still not true, which I think is just, first of all, very insensitive to say to family members who especially were in the household and know what was going on probably better than any of us. So I don't understand that comment. Roy's not related to them, and he's claiming that yes, Jose Menendez did those things to me.
So since I started filming this, there actually is an update that recently came out about Roy, and he actually sent a letter to Gavin Newsom. He posted about this on his Instagram, but yes, the governor of California, he sent a letter to him. I'm pretty sure even though the brothers were denied at the parole hearings, he can grant them clemency. So some people are just hoping that Gavin Newsom will grant that. So I think that is, part of the reason why Roy sent the letter to him. Just had to share that because that was a more recent update.
This first trial that they had was declared a mistrial. Then came trial number 2, and this trial just makes me even angrier than the first one because it was totally unfair. Lyle Menendez did not testify, so it was up to Eric to testify. And this is the craziest part. They were not allowed to include any of in their testimony. So basically, they have nothing. There were 2 choices for the verdict. Either they were not guilty, meaning they didn't commit these murders, which even the people like myself who, believe they were abused, we know that they their parents. There's no debating that. They admitted it. They've admitted it many times, and they've also apologized for it many times. And the second verdict was being guilty of the second degree without any possibility of parole. So basically, a life sentence. 2 big extremes with no middle ground whatsoever. Again, in my opinion, I believe that they should have got manslaughter. Obviously, they admitted to the crime, so the jury went with second degree murder. and they are still currently in prison today. I shared a lot. That was just kind of a brief overview. It seems to me, after going over both of these cases, they both show how it can escalate to killing your. I think there's two things that run through people's minds when they view these cases. One thing is that they just want a perfect victim. And for the people who suffer from severe trauma, it's just not how it works most of the time. For example, the Menendez brothers not telling the truth originally. People think they're liars who just hated their parents for no reason, when in reality, it's very hard to out your not only to your family, who they have said they had no idea any of this was going on until the brothers confessed. They're obviously, the family's entire perception of these people that they loved has been changed forever. But in their case, they had to share this to the world since it was televised. That picture perfect family image is completely destroyed. And even though their parents them, they still wanted to understand their parents and to be loved by them. They equated some of the abuse that they suffered from their parents with being loved rather than being victimized. That's a very common thing to see, especially in children who have been SA'd. In Clark's case, I feel like people could easily use the excuse of he was an alcoholic, he abused substances. Most people with trauma will have negative actions such as turning to drugs or alcohol, especially in the Menendez brothers case, where their own parents were verbally, physically, and sexually abusive towards them. Children will model that behavior, and if that behavior is not corrected, and if the children don't receive professional help with that behavior, it can carry over into adulthood. I've also seen people have the audacity to compare what Jose did to his children to what Lyle did to Eric, because in the trial, Lyle does ultimately apologize to Eric for doing things to him when they were children that he did because Jose did those things to him. Jose was a full-blown adult. Lyle was a child. There is no excuse for Jose Menendez. Child-on-child SA is common to see in children who have been molested. The second thing that I see when people get into the discourse about someone killing their abuse is that they make the abuser out to be a saint when they pass. It happened with Clark, you know. Dennis's family never apologized to Clark for what happened to him when Dennis died, and they just didn't believe it. To look at a pedophile and try to reason with that simply because of how they died is absolutely insane to me. This actually is going to bring me into a part of Stephanie Sue's interview with Clark where he talks about how pedophiles would be asked in a polygraph if they were as children, and that some of them in fact were, but some were not, and in his words just lied to gain sympathy. So in Kitty and Jose's situation with the Menendez brothers, could they have been growing up? It is possible, and I definitely think so, because Kitty's sister even talks about the home life that they had and how their father was an abusive person as well. I'm not so sure about Jose Menendez, but I do know one thing for sure, and that is, can it be passed down? Yes, it can. Generational trauma unfortunately does exist. Does it always happen? Absolutely not. Just because you were abused does not mean you will become the abuser. And Clark even mentions that as well in Stephanie's video. So I was actually looking at statistics of people who have killed their abusers who may have been related to them, like the Menendez brothers, and also abusers who were not. And even those, again, like the Menendez brothers, where they committed something called parricide, which is basically both of your parents. I found this very interesting document. I wanted to share some words from it. So I'll put a link to this document in the description, but this is the title of it. It says, Child Syndrome, Understanding Parricide. Annotation. This article argues that parricide, the killing of a parent by a child, is usually the act of a severely abused child, and this should be taken into account when determining the criminal liability of the child. Abstract. Only about 2% of all homicides in the United States are patricide and matricide cases. Some commit about 90% of all parricides. Most are 17 to 18-year-old white middle to upper class youths with no history of antisocial and violent behavior. They do not have long histories of aggressive behavior in school, and they rarely have arrest records. They tend to be mediocre to above average students. Most are loners, anxious to please their peers, and overpolite to adults. Their facades, however, hide lives of chaos and persecution. Not only have they typically been physically, mentally, and often sexually abused since they were young, but many have also witnessed repeated abuse of other family members. The parents who perpetrate the abuse are typically successful in their careers and have a reputation for perfectionism. Does this sound like anyone we may know? I mean, when I read this, it's like textbook to the Menendez brothers. Statutes in many states expressly permit expert testimony on behalf of battered women who have killed their mates. The same type of law should extend to children who kill their parents. How do abused children react to or cope with years of abuse? Most endure it. Tragically, some of these children who stay and take the abuse resort to violence as a problem-solving mechanism. After witnessing the use of violence by their parent or parents to solve problems, quiet dissent, or release tension, abused children sometimes learn to use violence in their own dealings with others. Other children who stay and endure abuse become withdrawn and use fantasy and denial to cope with the problem. Recent reports suggest that these children may employ defenses of denial and fantasy to such an extent that multiple personalities or psychosis result. Each year, about 400 parricides occur in the United States, though accounting for only about 2% of all homicides in the United States each year. This is not an insignificant statistic. Indeed, parricides and their headline reports are increasing. Nationwide reporting of parricide cases has pushed parricides into the public eye. The questions being raised are many and broad. Why do some children kill their parents? Are most parricides precipitated by child abuse? What is the profile of a child who commits parricide? Why has the relationship between parricide and child abuse been virtually ignored by the legal community? Heavy on that one. Can parricide as a reaction to child abuse be justified as an act of self-defense? The following sections will try to answer these questions. Battered women who kill their abusers, like children who kill their abusers, parents usually have no prior criminal convictions, have very low recidivism rates, and in general do not pose a threat to the rest of society. They have suffered ongoing abuse, have received little help from society, and have few options. In addition, many are more suicide than homicide. That definitely stands out to me because Eric has talked about thinking about taking his own life multiple times. What do years of abuse do to a child? The battered person syndrome explains how abuse results in cumulative terror. An abused child is in constant danger of battering. She or he may have no control over when, why, or how the battering will occur. She or he only knows for certain that it will occur. I think that's really important when we talk about manslaughter, because one of the reasons they didn't get manslaughter is because they weren't in necessarily imminent danger in that very moment. I don't think it should be just related to the moment that they committed the crime. I think that if you were abused once and you feel like you may be abused again, or you feel like you're going to be really abused at all, if you feel like your only option is to defend yourself, I feel that you should be able to defend yourself. Every time the cycle of violence is repeated, the second stage violence is more severe and the third stage calmness is shorter. Surely constant danger or being subjected to bodily harm, which keeps escalating, continues imminent danger. Those are just a few of the screenshots that I took from that, but I highly recommend you guys read that document because the whole time I'm reading it, I'm just like, this alone reminds me so much of the Menendez brothers. Moving on from that document, I think I said there's two things that I see in the discourse online about those who kill their abusers, but I actually want to add this one, and that is, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they run away? Why didn't they just get out of the house and never be seen again? Unfortunately, it's very common. Now, this is more talking about particularly women that leave their husbands. When a woman tries to leave an abusive situation, they're actually, with their husband or their partner, they are actually in probably their most vulnerable state, unfortunately, because obviously abusers crave, whether it's your boyfriend, a family member, your husband, your, wife, whatever the case may be. One thing that thrive off of is control over the person they're abusing. So when that control is broken, obviously that can lead to some very intense anger of the abuser. So you are in a very scary situation, unfortunately. Even though you're trying to get out of a scary situation, which makes sense, a lot of times people don't leave because they are scared of what their abuser will do when they leave. I mean, the Menendez brothers have testified that they truly believe their parents were going to kill them. I mean, their parents, their father was an immigrant, you know, he came from Havana, Cuba, and so he worked very hard to get where he was. So if he worked very hard to get to where he was, and then his sons out him as a child molester, not only just a child molester, but he's molesting his sons, you can imagine what that would do if it came to light and was believed, right? So I don't really understand why people say this, because it's very common for those who are, even though some do get out. I mean, thank goodness some people do escape their abuser. It's totally possible. Plenty of people have done it and went on to live, you know, great lives. Some of these people get restraining orders. That, unfortunately, even though it should be the case for everyone, we should be protected from our abusers. You know, the justice system should serve justice, right? But unfortunately, it doesn't always do that. This is an example. I recently watched the Stalking Amanda documentary on Hulu, and she actually, you know, had a restraining order against a man that was stalking her, and ultimately she couldn't extend that and ended up getting captured by him and was SA'd by him. And it's just, you know, you see things like that and you think, well, if they would have been protected, this could have been prevented. But unfortunately, people are not always protected from their abusers. And you gotta think, when that abuser is wealthy, powerful, has a great reputation, sometimes makes it hard for people to believe the victims in that situation. So to close out this portion of the video, where I talk about how abuse can escalate to victims killing their abuser, and the discourse of people talking about it online and if it's morally right or we should not do it and things like that, I want to share with you what Clark and the Menendez brothers as well have shared on how the killings have impacted them. So Clark actually tells Stephanie that just because he killed his abuser, who obviously gave him years of trauma and was harming other young boys, that the killing of his abuser failed to fix the pain that he felt inside. It didn't make it go away, and it wasn't the answer to the problems that he faced. He did say that he was glad to know that Dennis would never harm another child again, but that the work he had to do to heal from his trauma was not healed by Dennis, but from seeking professional help and facing his trauma. He said that he was a rare case of people being able to do so in a harsh prison environment, but that over the years he truly has taken control of his life and has even advocated for other victims of SA. He even passed a law that helped give victims of SA a longer time to come forward. Clark went on to share that most people do not feel comfortable about coming forward until they're 30 to 40 years old. The Menendez brothers have also spoken out, saying that they do regret killing their parents. It's really sad to hear them talk about them. You can tell just based off of this documentary on Netflix, but when that came out, there is a part towards the end of the documentary where Eric is expressing that he really just wanted to particularly understand his mother and wanted her to just say that she loved him and her to care for him and treat him like a son that she really loved. And when mentioning his dad, Jose, Eric says that when the grooming process started when he was just a child, that his father was actually very nice towards him, and they would have this alone time. And it was very different than their interactions when they weren't having this alone time. Oftentimes his father, you know, according to his testimony, and Alan saying that, you know, Jose would harm them, physically harm them, and was very aggressive at them, verbally yelling at them. Eric said, you know, he was used to that. He was used to his dad yelling at him and, you know, calling him slurs and saying harsh things to him. But when they had that alone time, his father was gentle with him and caring and loving. Even when he was touching Eric inappropriately, there were times where he would think, you know, this is just my dad showing that he loves me, because he was a child and he did not know any better. He said he just felt loved and seen by him as a child, up until, unfortunately, the abuse escalated to becoming more violent. And it's just an example of how they will gain the trust of the child. They will seem safe and, fun, and someone that they can go to, and like, oh, we have this secret that's special between us. And they use that to a child that, doesn't fully understand the situation, and they know that, and they use that against them, and they make them feel safe. But then the abuser continues to escalate the situations alone with that child into full-on violence. In Clark's case, a lot of people in Stephanie's video comments alone have labeled him as a hero for killing his abuser and protecting so many other young boys. He killed a man who was not only a pedophile, but also an animal abuser. For the Menendez brothers, I don't see those same comments the majority of the time. I see quite a mixture of opinions. People like myself who believe they should have been charged with manslaughter and believe 100% that them as well as Roy Rosello were abused. We see what they did as them acting in self-defense of the abusers who controlled every portion of their lives in order to protect their highly valued reputation. And then there are people who see them as cold-blooded murderers who do nothing but lie. And I think another part of that, not only with just the lying and the spending of the money, is also to the gruesomeness of the scene, because yes, it was very gruesome. To that, I have to say that, two things can be true at once. Was it a smart idea for them to go and spend their parents' money? No, but that does not cancel out them being abused. That doesn't mean that we just don't care that they're now. And just because their parents died in that violent way, that doesn't mean that they are automatically labeled as saints when the brothers and their family members have revealed to us that, lived in the household, what went on behind closed doors. So what are my thoughts? This is where I address it at the end of this video. What do I think about victims who kill their abusers? What is the solution? What is the right thing? And to that, I have to say, one of the most important things is that our justice system needs to do better for children. I personally see that it seems like, for whatever reason, pedophiles seem to get a slap on the wrist, and meanwhile, the victims seem to get much more than that. Our justice system needs to take pedophilia more seriously. They need to realize that pedophiles, they don't have a certain look or a certain kind of lifestyle. They can come from any social class, they can be any race. Just because someone is well respected in a community like Dennis, or is successful and wealthy like Jose Menendez, that doesn't automatically mean that they are not pedophiles, because they seem like good people on the surface. And honestly, with Jose Menendez, I would really argue against that, because there was even a point in the trial where a car dealership worker cried because Jose was so rude to him. Tennis instructors of the Menendez brothers that said that Jose was extremely overbearing when they would practice and very intense on his children. And it was just overwhelming as a tennis instructor to have to deal with that while trying to train these children. Protecting vulnerable children should be a huge priority in our society. But unfortunately, it seems like there are just countless incidents where many children are failed. They're failed by the adults and the system that's supposed to protect them. And when that happens, those children either end up suffering from horrible abuse, become runaways, they could be killed by their abuser or abusers, they could kill themselves, or in these instances ultimately come to the conclusion that they need to kill their abuser. I find it very unsettling how normalized it is to sexualize children in our society. I know this video has focused mainly on male victims of SA, and particularly male child victims of SA, but I will say, in my own experience, there was a time where I was a middle school girl, and I 100% have experienced multiple men who are grown trying to flirt with me, trying to make sexual advances on me, sending me inappropriate pictures. They were fully aware of my age and they just simply did not care. I've seen it in several movies and TV shows growing up, whether that be women dressed in schoolgirl outfits or the book and movie Lolita being romanticized as something that we should desire as young girls and something that is normalized for grown men. It's really about a disgusting man trying to justify liking a child because he truly thinks that young girls can lead older men on. Obviously, the adult in the situation with an underage person should not encourage any sexual advances. That's what adults are supposed to do. But yeah, it's just really sick to see how normalized sexualizing children or childlike things seems to be in our society, and how it seems that the punishments for pedophiles are far less severe than the ones that the victim of the pedophilia can face. I think that's all I have to share, you guys. That was a lot. I saw Stephanie's video. I was, looking out for the parole hearings for the Menendez brothers, and I just decided to put this video together. I'm sure if you just Google things about people killing their abusers, there are many things that come up. There's, fathers killing the child's abusers. It is a thing. And I just think it's always been a taboo thing to talk about, but I've always been intrigued with talking about taboo things because when we talk about it, if we can at least start to talk about it, certain stigmas and things like that start to get easier to talk about. Like, for example, child SA is obviously a very hard thing to talk about, but we have to talk about it for change to happen. You guys feel free to share your opinions and thoughts in the comments, but please keep it respectful because this is just a really serious topic. I don't want us to be just arguing and being nasty to each other, but we can definitely have intellectual conversation, right? Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. I'm not gonna promise that it's gonna be a non-serious video because I don't know. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.